Welcome to Musing Heavy, the website devoted to alternative reflections on hard rock and heavy metal. My name is Steve Meyer, and today we're going to begin a 5-part series based on my paper entitled Collecting Heavy Music in a World of Streaming. Right? If you prefer the text versions to the YouTube presentations, the links are provided below to my website, so you can read the essay in its entirety. But basically, what I'm going to talk about in this series is I'm going to try to provide justification for maintaining a physical music collection, CDs, vinyl, that sort of thing. And I'm also going to, in so doing, outline some of the pitfalls associated with streaming. Okay. Now, right from the beginning, I'm not trying to convert anybody back to, CD collections, etc. If you're a full-on streamer or a part-time streamer of music and it's working for you, I couldn't be happier. That is terrific, to each their own, right? But I believe there are some issues surrounding streaming that haven't been widely understood, or I think there are some arguments still developing. And I'm going to try to point some of that stuff out as we go through this series. Okay. Now, the examples I'm going to bring in, as you would expect from this website, which is devoted to hard rock and heavy metal, my examples will be based on heavy music. Okay. But I think much of what I'm going to say, if not everything that I'm going to say, could apply to any type of music. Again, streaming versus physical product. Whether you like country music, whether you like jazz or classical or folk or rap or punk, I think it all applies. All right. So in this first part, I'm going to set things up, going to talk about how people are tending to consume their music. Going to also point out where I'm kind of out of step, or people like me that like to maintain sort of physical product collections are a little more out of step these days. And also in this first part, I'm going to refute this notion that a CD collection is essentially worthless. A lot of people have that notion, and I'm going to provide examples as to why I believe that's just not true. Okay. So let's get going here. And as always, I like to share my screen so you can kind of follow along with me if you kind of want to read along as I present. Or like I say, you can always just read the text and not listen to me at all if you prefer. Anyway, here we go, sharing the screen. So collecting heavy music in a world of streaming. So let's talk about some of the shifting trends in music consumption. Well, okay, so I've kind of already, full disclosure, I've kind of already talked about my bias, and you'll hear about this quite a bit in this series, but I'm steadfast in my aspirations to preserve and build upon my compact disc collection. I got quite a few CDs. They're predominantly heavy metal and hard rock. And also, though, I have a growing number of blues CDs, and I'm also pretty into prog rock as well. But most of what I collect is heavy music, right? Now, I'll admit, it's not just CDs. I do spend a little bit of time with satellite radio, especially if I'm in the car. I really like liquid metal as an example, especially to be exposed to new bands and new things. But overall, I remain committed to physical product. And I have avoided streaming in any meaningful way. Yeah, I'll check out a YouTube concert of a favorite band once in a while. But basically, when I want to seriously listen to music, I'm downstairs in my music room, got my stereo with my 2 speakers and subwoofer and all that great stuff. And I'm spinning discs, man. That's what I do. All right. I realize I'm bucking prevailing trends. I'm a bit of a dinosaur, but I think there's reasons for this. Dinosaurism, if you want to put it that way, and I'll get into that. But no doubt, recent advances in streaming and downloading technologies have encouraged many music fans to flock to popular online sites for their musical fixes, right? Fair enough. And that can come in all kinds of forms, right? In some cases, this actually can be pretty sophisticated, right? Some streamers out there, hey, they're audiophiles, right? And they might subscribe to a high fidelity streaming service, such as Tidal, right? Where you can get CD quality or better streaming, right? They might utilize very intricate organizational software such as Rune that helps them navigate all these massive streaming album choices that they have. And they might play these actual songs through an expensive hi-fi system. They might have an expensive streamer, an amp, a preamp, couple real kick butt speakers, a subwoofer, all kinds of peripherals, right? So their approach to streaming could be really quite complicated and actually probably pretty expensive as well. But on the other hand, streaming can be incredibly simple and really inexpensive, right? As occurs with millions of people who consume music simply by playing it on their phone, right? It's very cheap. I mean, the only cost would be maintaining your phone plan and your internet provider, but that's it. Music is really cheap if you're streaming that way. According to one source, CBS News in 2021, the breakdown in music consumption is as follows. So 41% of people are streaming, right? So that's the biggest proportion. And no doubt that's going to continue to grow. 31% of people are still listening to radio in various forms. That proportion actually surprises me that it's still that high, but a significant people still do that. Streaming's at the top though. About 15% of people will consume their music through digital files. So I'm assuming they're downloading, songs and albums, et cetera, on their computer, and they're playing it that way. And only 7% of people these days are consuming their music through physical products. So, and that's combining CDs, vinyl, probably even cassettes, maybe even 8-tracks if people still have those, right? But only 7%. And then the remaining 6% would be other approaches or people who just don't like music. I can't understand how that could be, but I guess those folks are out there. Okay, well, a couple things. It should be noted that this survey was exclusive to the US, okay? So if you polled people in different parts of the world, those proportions could well be different. They probably would be. And it also was asking for a person's main source of music consumption. So again, some of those proportions could be a little different if people were allowed to make more than one choice. I stream and I also have CDs, or I listen to the radio and I also download, et cetera. So yeah, those proportions could vary depending on the sample, of course, and the way the question's asked. But nevertheless, right, there's no question that you can't deny the importance of streaming. Streaming's the big kahuna these days, and probably it's only going to get bigger. So there's no denying that, right? And certainly many fans of heavy music, and really music fans of all stripes, revel in the vast choices available through streaming services. And there's no doubt, it's immense. You have access to millions of titles, which, 10 years ago, we just didn't have that sort of, that ability, right? Now this may or may not matter to you, but the sound quality of streaming can vary amongst providers, but there's no question that the sheer quantity of material you can get is absolutely staggering, okay? However, I just right off the bat want to make a couple disclaimers there. It should be mentioned that streaming's quantity advantage is a little bit overstated for at least two reasons. Now, again, you might say these are kind of, I'm nitpicking here, and maybe I am, but I'm going to say it anyway, right? Yeah, you got access to millions of titles, but for example, few metalheads, right, are going to care about having access to millions of country, jazz, classical, rap, whatever songs, right? I mean, that's just not going to care. Okay, yeah, I have access to all these songs, but I'm never going to listen to them. So the quantity advantage is a little overstated in that sense. Just as a pop fan isn't going to marvel at how many doom metal albums they could digest. If I told my aunt, hey, you realize you got the whole Cathedral catalog at your disposal, she's going to say, well, that's just great, but I ain't listening to any of that, right? So, so what really matters is the number of titles available within an individual's preferred musical genre, right? So for being specific, that's what really matters here. Okay, second point about this quantity advantage of streaming. Well, those with more mainstream tastes probably aren't going to feel any restrictions. If what you listen to is mostly widely available songs and albums, you're probably going to be able to access everything you've ever wanted through streaming. Fair enough. But fans of more obscure hard rock and heavy metal, or just more obscure music in general, right? They might be concerned that some of those albums are not attainable through streaming, due to record label inconsistencies and or some artists just not choosing to make their music available that way. So streaming is, your choices are immense, but they're not necessarily complete, okay? Especially if your tastes are a little more obscure, all right? But the overall popularity of streaming would imply that 41%, and we know that's going to grow, that the majority of people are not overly troubled by a few missing pieces, right? So they'd say, Steve, you're just making a big deal over nothing here, and perhaps I am in this case, right? Perhaps people with more offbeat tastes will argue that deficiencies in one band's discography are more than made up with access to countless others. So yeah, I can't get everything that Samson released, on by streaming, but man, I mean, I'm missing a couple titles there, but I have access to everything, or all kinds of other bands. I shouldn't say everything, but all kinds of other bands that play music similar to Samson, right? So that's a trade-off I'll gladly take, in other words, many would argue. And I get that. I can understand why you might say that. And of course, the cost is incredibly attractive. The extremely low cost of streaming, which, let's face it, ranges from basically zero, other than you got to pay for internet connections, right, to maybe $20 a month. I mean, I think that's on the high end, right, is a massive attraction for a lot of people. Not only do you have access to all of these songs, like millions, maybe thousands in your chosen era, but you get them for so cheap, right? So again, for a lot of people, yeah, I know there's a few things I don't have access to, but given how cheap it is and how many titles I can get, wow, that's a trade-off I'll take anytime. Fair enough. All right, I get all that. I get why people would find streaming so appealing. All right, so what's with me? What the heck's with me, right? Why do I continue to uphold a collection comprised of both easy to get and highly obscure CDs? And why do I keep looking for more? Hey, I ain't stopping. I still buy a couple CDs a week on average. I keep going. Why am I doing that? Why did I recently pay $23 plus tax for the latest Decapitated release called Cancer Culture? Really good. I don't care where you get it from. You should hear it, right? But anyway, why did I do that when I could have subscribed to a streaming service for about the same price, or cheaper really, for this one CD and had access to millions of others? What am I thinking here? Why am I spending considerable time and energy relentlessly searching online CD marketplaces? And I do, not every day, but most days I'm checking, trying to fill in holes in my CD collection, not necessarily buying, but just checking out, oh, that's still pretty expensive, better come back later, etc. Right? So why am I doing that? So I can complete my Nuclear Assault collection on CD as one of many examples, when I could simply stream most or all of their albums, Nuclear Assault, effortlessly anytime I want. The search would be over if I just stream. I wouldn't get all their titles, but I'd get most of them, and it would be real quick, right? Should I just be written off as a relic that really just needs to get with it? Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Or is there redeeming logic to my musical consumption choices? Well, I'd like to think, yeah, that's a little more, the situation. Admittedly, it's probably a little of both. But I'm going to argue there is some logic as to why I am maintaining a CD collection, and I've basically backed away from streaming so far and probably for the foreseeable future, okay? And so I'm going to provide a number of arguments as to why I'm doing that and why people like me are doing that throughout this series. But just for now, I want to get into this idea of the value of physical product, right? As I was saying, there are people, I mean, maybe one reason why they've gone towards the streaming route is because they think their physical product has no value, right? There are those who hold the opinion that CDs have become effectively worthless, at least in monetary value. I mean, they might have personal value, sentimental value, but in monetary terms, they're useless, right? They're not worth anything, right? Well, that to me is very much an overgeneralization. CDs are not worthless. And in the future, they might become even more of more value. And again, I'm going to give you some examples of this. Now, again, admittedly, today, if you bring widely available mainstream CD titles to your local music store, assuming you still have one, and I hope you do actually, yeah, you'll be lucky to receive pennies on the dollar, right? If you bring your CD collection or a portion of it to the front counter and the person behind the counter goes, they leaf through them a bit and go, ah, man, I can't give you much for these. Or more likely, they might say, could you just take these away? I'm not going to give you anything for them, right? Yes, the aftermarket for most classic albums on CDs is not lucrative at the moment. There's just too many of them out there. It's economic forces that are driving this, right? So if you're going, if you want to get rid of your AC/DC collection on CD and you're bringing in mostly like Back in Black, Highway to Hell, that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, they're not going to give you anything for those. I get that, right? But in contrast, many hard to get and or out of print CDs are trading north of $50 these days on various marketplaces, right? And you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, I research this stuff all the time because I buy this stuff, but you can check it out. It's true, right? This is a strong indication that a segment of the music buying universe still values these products. If they didn't, they wouldn't be trading for that kind of money. In spite of popular opinion, there is enduring demand for certain titles in CD form still today, right? And some folks are willing to pay inflated prices. Within reason, I'm one of those, right? If it's a copy I need, right? Very much the forces of supply and demand are at work here, right? When supply for a product that has demand becomes limited, its price naturally increases. Let's look at a couple examples. Take the example of Black Sabbath. This is not an obscure heavy band. If you're a fan of hard rock and heavy metal, there is zero chance that you have not heard of Black Sabbath, I would say, right? To say Black Sabbath was important to heavy music is like, you know, the understatement of all time, basically, right? So they're a really well-known heavy rock band, metal band, however you want to call them, right? But some of their titles are out of print or extremely hard to get, and they're actually valued really highly in CD format. So I prepared a little demonstration here that we'll have a quick look at. You might be surprised to know, right, that there are a number of Black Sabbath titles that if you want a physical CD copy of them, they're going to cost you quite a bit of money, right? So CDs are far from worthless. If you want Headless Cross, which was released in 1989, Tear in 1990, or Forbidden in 1995, this was going to cost you. And again, I went to quite a few websites to sort of verify this. If you want Headless Cross, be prepared to spend over $90, right? Tear is going to cost you quite a bit more. I haven't seen it for under $140 for quite a while. I have these, so I'm not seriously looking, but just, you know, for this presentation, I checked a few things out. Forbidden will cost you over $90 as well. Now, some might say, okay, yeah, it's Black Sabbath, but Ozzy Osbourne wasn't singing on these albums. Ronnie James Dio didn't sing on these albums. They are by far the two most popular vocalists that Sabbath had. This was a Tony Martin era. I would argue these are still great albums, but yeah, they're a little more obscure than anything Ozzy did or Ronnie James Dio did. Fair enough, fair enough. But it's still Black Sabbath, right? This is still arguably the most important heavy rock band that ever was, right? And a lot of their titles, a number of them, are going to cost you a lot of money if you want them on CDs. So CDs are not worthless here. But I'll go even a little further with this. If you want to get the Paranoid or the Volume 4 box sets, now, these do have the ever popular Ozzy on them, right? In fact, the Paranoid album is Black Sabbath's biggest selling album like ever by far of all time. It has War Pigs, it has Iron Man, Paranoid, Fairies Wear Boots. A lot of their big songs are on here. In fact, it's one of the biggest selling hard rock albums like by anybody, right? It's incredibly foundational, incredibly important. I can go on and on, you know, etc. But if you want the box set for it, and it's a great box set, by the way. It's the Paranoid album, but it's a lot more than that. It's got a couple rare early concerts, again, with Ozzy, right? So this is really good value for your money. If you're a Sabbath fan, I mean, you probably want this, right? When it first came out in 2016, this 4 CD set, it would have cost you around $50. Now, if you want it, a few years later, it's going to cost you, I've never seen it for under $100. In fact, most sites, it's $150 to $300, right? So it's appreciated massively. So even the ever popular Ozzy stuff, right? I mean, yes, just the album Paranoid, I agree. That CD, you're not going to get much for, but the box set, it's appreciated like crazy. How about Volume 4? Also a really popular Sabbath title. It also has the ever popular Ozzy on it, right? Now, this one was released just last year. Again, if you bought it when it first came out, it would have cost you about 50 bucks. Now it's going to cost you over $100. I haven't seen it under $100. I don't think I ever will, right? Again. So it's doubled in value in just 1 year. Okay. So CDs have value, I guess is the point I'm making. But it just depends on which ones we're talking about. One other example. So you might say, okay, that's Black Sabbath. They're popular. Lots of people want their stuff, yada, yada. Yeah, okay. But that happens with more obscure heavy bands too, or more obscure bands in general. Take the example of Angel Witch, right? They only have 5 albums. Little context, Angel Witch was one of the early forerunners of the new wave of British heavy metal movement that occurred in the late 70s, early 80s. Angel Witch was a contemporary of Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, Saxon, etc. In fact, there was a time early on, all bets were off as to who was going to become a bigger band, Angel Witch or Iron Maiden. Not kidding you. I mean, now that might seem absurd because Iron Maiden's one of the biggest heavy bands of all time, right? But Angel Witch was basically at the same level as Iron Maiden in the late 70s, early 80s, right? For various reasons, though, Angel Witch has always stayed reasonably obscure. But for people who are into the new wave of British heavy metal, most will agree their first album is a drop-dead classic. And by the way, if you are an Iron Maiden fan and you've never heard the first Angel Witch, you've got to check that out, right? Anyway, if you look at the value for Angel Witch's first album, which again, widely considered a classic, obscure, but still considered a classic, right? It's going to cost you anywhere between $30 and $50 if you want a CD copy. Why? Because there's all kinds of versions of it. Do you want the standard CD version? Do you want the remastered version? Do you want the deluxe version? Do you want the Japanese pressing? On and on it goes. Well, depending on what version you want, it's going to cost you 30 to 50 bucks, right? Not cheap, but not crazy expensive either, I guess. If you want their second album, Screaming and Bleeding, which was put out a couple of years later, it's going to cost you over 60 bucks. If you want Frontal Assault on CD, it's going to cost you over 40, right? And then Angel Witch sort of reformed a couple times. A couple of the more contemporary albums, by the way, are really great. Like if you like the first Angel Witch, you should check out these last couple because they are really good. Anyway, if you want As Above, So Below, which was released about 10 years ago, it's going to cost you over $40 now on CD. And if you want Angel of Light, their most recent CD, which is only a couple of years old, this one is still around normal CD prices, which again is, somewhere between $20 and $24 now. That's what a new CD will generally cost. But you can almost predict, fast forward 2 or 3 years, an Angel of Light will also probably be worth $30, $40, right? Okay. So the point I'm making here, just to sort of wrap this part up, my point is that if CDs are worthless, which some people seem to think they are, then prices for limited commodities would not be inflated, right? And we would not see continued increase with added scarcity, right? Clearly, there is still demand for out-of-print titles by classic bands such as Black Sabbath, right? And even for hard-to-get items by lesser-known heavy artists such as Angel Witch. And again, this would apply to other forms of music as well. When supply is restricted, CD prices are actually commanding great returns, right? There's value here, is my point. Admittedly, you could get some of these titles, so some of the Sabbath things or Angel Witch that I just mentioned and many others, you could get some of these titles a little cheaper on CD if you're willing to settle for certain South American, Asian, or Eastern European versions. Be forewarned, though, these could well be counterfeits, right? But you could get them cheaper. But even so, even if you go that route, prices are still going to be above the original retail listings, right? Moreover, the forces of supply and demand could make even mainstream CD titles attractive at some point in the future. So sure, if you want to take Black Sabbath's Paranoid, I'm talking the single CD version, not the box set. If you take that to your local record store today and say, give me money for that, Jack, Jack's going to say, sorry, I don't want it, right? I get that. But that might change in 10 years. That CD might have value down the road, right? All we got to do is look at what happened to vinyl to maybe get an idea of where CDs might go, right? There was a time, especially in the 1990s, that vinyl in any form, used, obscure, mainstream, whatever, and actually the turntables for that matter, the stuff you play it on, right, became practically valueless in a commercial sense. You couldn't give albums away, vinyl I'm talking, they had no value at all, right? But things have changed rapidly today. Today, vendors sell new vinyl for top dollar, usually prices in the $30 to $50 range. So they went from literally nothing, right? You might have had to pay people to take vinyl off your hands to now 30 or 50 bucks a pop for a new vinyl record, right? I mean, if you wanted to buy Paranoid, just the single album on vinyl, it probably cost you $30 now. As widely available as that is, that's what it's costing you now. And even used vinyl will command good return these days. I go to record shows. I try to get to one once a year, or a couple times a year if I can, right? And most of the vendors these days are selling vinyl. That's what they sell, and it's almost all used, right? And they'll sell widely available vinyl, sometimes not even in that great condition, for 10, 15 bucks a pop, right? So vinyl has tons of value these days, new and used. And who's to say CDs won't go through a similar trend down the road, right? So therefore, if you still have a CD collection and have shifted to streaming, and lots of people have, and if you're happy, fine. I mean, I'm not telling you shouldn't, but I would recommend, however, storage over dumping. Don't just throw your CDs in landfill, because you might have an investment on your hands. If not now, maybe in the future. Demand for CDs, obscure or otherwise, could appreciate in the future, and you may be able to cash in on your investment down the road, assuming you choose to part with your physical product. I know I never will. Basically, you bury the CDs with me or something like that. I don't know. But if you ever did want to part with your physical product, you might be able to make some money off it. And if you got some obscure titles now, you might make money off them now and not realize it, right? So again, they have value. It's an overgeneralization to say that this physical product, i.e. example of CDs, has no value. That's just not true, in spite of how popular streaming is. Okay, so as we move forward in this series, I'm going to talk a little more precisely again about the justification of maintaining physical product and some of the pitfalls associated with streaming that we maybe are just starting to understand today, right? I'll talk about such issues as the impact this is having on the artists themselves through streaming. I mean, you don't make a living through streaming, I'll tell you that. We'll talk about that, more in the next section, actually. That streaming is making music almost valueless, right? I think there's some real problems associated with that. And I think it's affecting how we absorb music compared to when you've got physical product as well. So all these are issues I'm all going to talk about. In part two, I'm specifically going to talk about and use examples of some extreme bands, but again, it has universal themes. We'll talk about the example of Cannibal Corpse, actually how little they're making through streaming. Cannibal Corpse is probably the most commercially successful extreme metal band that we have right now, so they're a good example, but they make very little from streaming, and I'm actually going to crunch numbers and show you that. And I'm going to use the example of Deicide, a controversial band in a lot of ways, but I'm going to put it against a backdrop of how secure is extreme music on streaming services, right? You might think, well, I have access to all this music and I will forever. Will you have it forever? If the powers that be somehow will deem this, I don't know if this is appropriate music. These streaming platforms could censor this stuff fairly easily. Theoretically, I'm going to bring in those types of issues. So I hope you will join me for part two and the other parts as well. Again, you don't have to be a fan of heavy music. I think no matter what you listen to, I think the discourse on sort of streaming versus physical product, I think could be interesting to many people. But thank you for checking this out. And I hope you have a terrific day. Take care.